We wanted to create a film that was representative of the kind of films that have inspired us, honoured the films that have inspired us, but also felt unlike kind of, I guess, your classic British kind of crime thriller or other movies which are great that come out of this country, but we wanted to do something that felt it had a kind of more international feel and also could be a possible future, a possible London.
I was going to say that because it's a possible future. I said this topic, but there are plenty of fairly influential people who are arguing for a legalisation of all drugs and control of them.
Yeah.
Was that very much in your mind when you were making this?
Definitely. I think it's an argument, it's a discussion that has many strong arguments both for and against it. And I think what we were excited by was, rather than trying to get onto a sort of soapbox and start, peddling an angle, it was much more important for us to present a kind of possible reality were the legalisation arguments be won by the people, in favour of it. What would happen then if that were to take place?
Did you think your opinion changed on legalisation of drugs throughout making this?
No, not really, because I was more interested really in kind of the psychological and character kind of effect. What would happen to society if this was actually a reality? For me, that's, I guess, one of the great things you can do with science fiction. It's an opportunity to get excited by a what if, and then explore that and see where that takes you.
And you mentioned the character then. I mean, the issue, presumably as well, if characters are on drugs and taking drugs, that adds a different dimension to how they're portrayed.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, our lead character is sober, and that's kind of one of the main sort of tensions in the film, is that he's in a world where everyone is saying, this is a great thing, you should be doing more of it, and he's had a very bad experience using drugs as a policeman, which he's now trying to kind of put behind him and make amends for. So it becomes a kind of tussle for his soul between the kind of arguments pro and against. So he, for me, is a kind of vessel through which some of that debate can be explored.
Do you think we debate drugs in a sort of sensible way nowadays? I mean, there's still the war on drugs exists in the US. We're still, if you call for legalisation of drugs, you're seen as slightly hysterical and out of step with the time. Yeah. How do you think we approach it in this country?
I think on both sides you have hysteria, which is always unhelpful. I think for me, that just, taking drugs is usually a sign of distress, I think people, they don't look like they're in distress, and it can be a very unattractive thing. It leads to crime, it leads to domestic violence, all kinds of bad things can happen with drugs. But I think that it is ultimately a cry for help, and I think that if people are crying for help, it's the responsibility of people who are in a position of strength to do something about that. And whether legalisation is the answer, I think that there must be a conversation about looking after people in a way, which does happen even though drugs are illegal. But the problem is, if things are illegal, people go in search of, they go to bad places to find a fix, a hit or whatever. And again, in Narcopolis, we look at the sort of two sides of that, where there's a safe environment and there's an unsafe environment in which to take drugs.
Going to the actual making of the film, how much of a challenge was it to make a low-budget British film that had high visual standards? How hard was that to make that work?
Well, the short answer is very hard. But I think all films are very hard. You speak to any filmmaker, they'll probably say the same thing. But for us, the challenge was really to take two challenges, one of which was it was a broad canvas, and we had a very small amount of money with which to make the film. So it's making that money stretch, getting an amazing cast, and being able to, it's a big cast, lots of locations, that kind of stuff, which does cost a lot of money. But the second thing was also just the visuals of the film, is to try and create something that, as I said, didn't feel like we'd seen it before, was competitive, felt like it could compete with some of the big American movies that I grew up absolutely adoring and wanting to kind of make and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, not a cliched vision of London, because when you step out the window, London is a beautiful city and it's full of amazing kind of tourist attractions, but those would date it immediately. And we want to put a film into the future, but we didn't have the budget to build enormous sets or what have you. So it had to be a very clever use of camera, and that ultimately was the toughest thing to achieve, I think.